You're listening to the Co-Main Event Podcast. And now your hosts, Fowlkes and Chad Dundas.
That's right. You're listening to another episode of the Co-Main Event Mixed Martial Arts Podcast. I'm your co-host from BleacherReport.com, Chad Dundas, and joining me as always from MMA Junkie in USA Today, it's your friend and mine, Mr. Ben Fowlkes. Ben, how you doing this week?
Tell you, Chad, just to let people a little bit behind the curtain here, I showed up on time, knocked on your door, rang your doorbell, and nothing. And I tell you, for a minute there, I was picturing a Good Will Hunting scenario. I thought, finally, the day has come where Chad Dundas has just packed up, moved on, no goodbye, no nothing. And it was the best part of my day. And then you showed up.
Well, it was plausible, right? It was
Right.
plausible that I might finally just bail and decide to finally take advantage of my genius.
Well, you had me until that last part. But then I started to think, wait a minute, a more likely scenario. Chad had a stroke. He's in there laying down on the kitchen floor. Cell phone just out of reach. And I'm thinking, how long do I wait before I kick down the door?
So when you determined that it was most probable that I had had a stroke, that's when you decided to just sort of sit down on the front steps and take 5?
If you'll,
Let
first of
nature
all,
take its course?
check the record, bud. I sent you a text. I will read this text out loud right now. It says, "Are you dead on the kitchen floor in there? ? Groan twice for yes."
So there I am,
Welfare check. That's called a welfare check.
on the verge of checking out, on the floor in the kitchen, reaching for my phone, trying to call for help, and I get a text from you. You think that helps me, or?
I mean, I don't want to call myself a hero. That's for other people to say. But yeah, I'm a hero, basically.
Did it occur to you that maybe I was just suffering from a little bit of scorched earth hangover?
Well, that was possible.
Because Friday night, Ben, we saw, we scorched the earth.
It is possible that after that experience, you just decided you couldn't do this shit anymore. You couldn't do this podcast anymore, and you didn't know how to tell me, and that's fair. And so you figured you'd just kind of ghost me.
What if the night of scorched earth, after it was over, I just got in the van and drove?
Maybe you blacked out. You started out thinking, like, why were the horses wearing sheets? And then the next thing you know, you're in Missouri. No memory of how you got there. See, for the people who did not or have not yet gone back and watched our live stream of Scorched Earth, first of all, you got a lot of catching up to do. Second of all, I want you to know that I am very serious about this threat. At some point, when we get into this business of mailing out stuff and prizes and gifts from the Co-Main Event Podcast, which we'll do on occasion, at some point, one of you in this process is going to piss us off and make the mistake of giving us your address at around the same time. And you know what's going to happen? You're just going to come home one day and discover that you have been sent, without your agreement, a copy of Scorched Earth on DVD.
Autographed.
That autographed by us.
Not by Gina Carano.
No.
But by you and me.
That's right. And that will be our personal fuck you for whatever it is you did to piss us off. We will, as an act of malice, send someone this Scorched Earth DVD at some point in the future.
You know what? I found the Rotten Tomatoes review of Scorched Earth that I believe referred to it as, quote, kind of fun for a while, end quote, to be spot on.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
You know, Scorched Earth starts and it's not great, but there's some stuff going on that at least maybe you have questions about. Maybe you're intrigued by a few things. Watching Gina Carano and the other quote unquote actors drop their lines on this thing, you know, passes the time. You get about the whole thing's like 96 minutes long, something like that.
Yeah.
You get about 45 minutes in.
Yeah, that's fair.
It just drops off the table.
But speaking of kind of fun for a little while, if people were not in on the live stream, they missed the other big news that coming soon for Patreon subscribers is an episode of the CME Book Club. Now, the only thing we have left to decide here, we talked it over, we decided, you know, with Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz back in the news talking up some trilogy fight, they both have memoirs out there from like 10 or 12 years ago. We got to pick one of them to read. The only question is how we're going to choose which one.
I like your enthusiasm for memoir.
Yeah.
You're not going to put an R on there.
No. And I'm not going to call it an autobiography because I want to respect the art that clearly went in to Iceman, My Fighting Life by Chuck Liddell and whoever actually wrote it.
I mean, the truth is we can't lose at this point.
No.
Either the Chuck Liddell memoir or the Tito Ortiz autobiography. It's going to be a huge win for us. It's going to be a home run.
And everybody is going to want to get in on, because the book club episode, when we read Bar Brawler, may be the best thing this podcast has ever done.
So what do we do? Do we wait for Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz to sign on the dotted line?
Well, we might wait a long time, as in forever, for that to happen.
Well, do we want to have this book club thing and read the Chuck Liddell and or Tito Ortiz memoir, and then to have no
there's no way this
trilogy
could be for
fight?
nothing.
What if no trilogy fight materializes? Are we still cool with it?
Well, then we will have enriched our lives by reading this book. Either way, it doesn't matter. And I think we're going to want to get cracking on this. I don't think you're going to want to wait for two guys in their mid to late 40s to actually get together and fight each other. And I think, worst case scenario, I seem to recall reading a bit of Chuck Liddell's memoir back when it first came out. Is there a story in there that he tells about having sex with two women at the same time while doing a phone interview with a radio station the morning after a title defense? Yes. It's basically the only thing I remember about reading a little bit of that book so I could do a review. So, again, there's no way for us to go wrong here. We just got to figure out which one we're going to read with help from the CME universe, and then we get cracking.
Are we going to put it up to a vote, a popular vote?
I guess. I mean, I feel like we may have lost people's trust after we put the Gina Carano thing up for a vote, and then we watched Scorched Earth, which wasn't even on the ballot.
Well, new shit had come to light,
That's
man.
true.
We got music this week from our guy, The Fifth Element, a music producer from down there in Fort Worth, Texas. If you like what you hear, you can check him out on Twitter at The Fifth Element or Facebook.com/The Fifth Element or SoundCloud.com/The Fifth Element Official. And as you all know by now, that's the word "the" with an A. 3 rounds as usual this week in the co-main event podcast. In round number 1, Kamaru Usman defeated Damian Maia on Saturday in the main event of UFC Fight Night 129, and it was not great. But that alone makes it interesting to talk about. And in round number 2, Crow Cop's martial times are on hold due to an injury. But never fear, the young vagabond Gegard Mousasi guns for middleweight gold against Rafael Carvalho on Friday at Bellator 200. Hashtag, would you still watch? And in round number 3, the Wonder Boy takes on an opponent 10 years his junior when Stephen Thompson meets Darren Till at Fight Night 130 from jolly old England. All that plus, are you fucking kidding me and just saying stuff? But first, like we always do about this time, let's do a little bit of listener mail.
Listener mail.
First piece of listener mail this week comes to us from Dean Whitehead, who writes, well, Dominic Reyes went out there and starched Jared Cannonier this weekend in just under 3 minutes. Don't look now, but Reyes is 9-0 professionally and 3-0 in the UFC with 3 first-round finishes. With the lack of depth at 205 in the UFC, somehow Jan Blachowicz is ranked number 5. Is there any reason to believe that Reyes can be a capital G guy and make a run in this division? Also, do we think his nickname, quote-unquote, the Devastator? What do we think of his nickname, the Devastator? Are you digging this, or can we do better? Please discuss, if you will.
Do you want to guess which Premier League team Dean Whitehead plays for? Because it is the fakest-sounding one yet.
Clifton-on-Pumphrey.
That's honestly slightly more realistic. Huddersfield Town.
Okay, that's not real.
Come on.
It's like just a bunch of hobbits running around.
What is that?
Huddersfield
What kind of
Town.
Middle-earth bullshit is that?
What do we think about the Devastator, Ben? Dominic Reyes.
I mean, were they going through just the alliteration there?
I think so, probably.
Dominic the Devastator Dominic Reyes.
Well, if you were going to do alliteration, do you think it would be better to do the Devastator or just Devastating Dominic Reyes?
Well, okay, there you go.
I mean, we're already workshopping this thing.
Yeah, that.
Although I'm inclined to say the Devastator's not terrible. It's not like there's a herd of Devastators out
See,
there.
that's what I was going to say. It does have, it stands out. It's not just being like another pit bull. At the same time, it's one of those nicknames where I can't ever imagine somebody just calling you that.
True.
That doesn't have to be the goal of every nickname. Like, every nickname doesn't have to be like a Shogun Hua or a Rampage Jackson style thing. But it does have the problem that some nicknames have where it sounds like something you and your buddies came up with just trying super hard to be cool.
So what do we think about Dominic the Devastator Reyes' upside in the light heavyweight division as Clifton-on-Pumphrey midfielder Dean Whitehead has written in to ask us about. He is, in fact, 3-0 now in the UFC, 9-0 overall. Mostly stoppage victories.
All but one of his career fights, I believe, are stoppage victory. I think he only has one decision. All his fights in the UFC, he's stopped in the first round.
28 years old, 6'4", has a pretty good frame for this light heavyweight division. He's lanky without being skinny.
Good athlete, you can see, and he just sharp stand-up skills. Doesn't seem to have too many glaring weaknesses.
So, looks like he graduated from Stony Brook University in IT technical support.
Huh.
So there you go with that.
How about that?
One of the things, okay, let's say two of the things Dominic Reyes has going for him. Age, not even 30 years old yet. And he's fighting, as we have all said, in this 205-pound division, where you don't need to have a lot going for you.
Nope.
To become a capital G guy.
Right. Well, and he wins this fight, wins it in the first round. You could kind of complain about the stoppage, but it looked like we were headed that direction anyway, even if it didn't come right then. But afterwards, you know, he's standing there, and you start to realize, like, for me at least, I wrote about this afterwards. Feel like I'm looking up suddenly to be like, oh, this guy, maybe we have some signs of life here at light heavyweight. And then he calls out Jordan Johnson, which, again, hey, you're doing a lot of things right. You go out there, you finish a guy in the first round, and you have a name that you want to say in the post-fight interview. Although I saw people on Twitter reacting by being kind of like, who? Are we sure that that's a UFC fighter? And I do remember Jordan Johnson popping up every once in a while. So, yeah, okay. No hurry, I guess, is what we're getting out of this. Is Dominic Reyes sounds like maybe gonna take his time to work his, you know, he wasn't like, John Jones, get your shit together. Come back here and I'm gonna kick your ass. But, you know, he's got somebody in mind. It's encouraging. It makes you think we have some stuff going on. There might be a future at light heavyweight, but then I also found myself wondering, did anybody see it? Because this fight card, and then we can talk a little bit about it later when we talk about some of the other fights from it, but had several fighters where you're like, okay, young up-and-coming talent.
Yeah.
Here it is. Here's what you're hoping for is going to turn into good prospects in the future. But when it's on a fight card like this, where there weren't a whole lot of reasons to watch and not a whole lot of big name value, you'd be surprised if the ratings turn out to be any good for it. And I understand the logic where with a fight card like this is where you want to give this up-and-coming talent a chance to shine. But if you put them all on this fight card together, instead of kind of sprinkling them on other bigger cards where people are actually going to watch, do you waste it because they have these good moments, they're giving you a reason to think and care about them in the future, but if nobody watches, it's trees falling in the forest.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say wasted, but clearly this isn't the breakthrough moment, right, for Dominic Reyes. We're not all going to be talking about the first-round TKO that he scored at UFC Fight Night 129. And frankly, the first three UFC victories, all of them first-round stoppages, but you got Joaquin Christensen, Jeremy Kimball, and Jared Cannonier Saturday night, I'm sorry. It's not like he is fighting the cream of the crop in the light heavyweight division, not even really fighting guys who are in the mix. And then, like you said, he goes and calls out Jordan Johnson, who is technically ranked.
Is he?
Number 15 out of 15.
Okay.
In the UFC official light heavyweight rankings. But yeah, man, like if you're Dominic Reyes and you want to be number one with a bullet, you're on a come up here, you would think somebody like maybe a Tyson Pedro, Patrick Cummins, even Corey Anderson or like OSP or somebody like that would make sense as a call out. So it does. I mean, I don't know that we want to read too much into it, but I think you're right. It kind of makes it seem like maybe Dominic Reyes is taking his time here. Maybe he knows more than we do. Frankly.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's his ninth professional fight. He's been at it slightly less than 4 years as a pro. Also, nobody's going to call out Corey Anderson because a lot of ways for you to look bad in that fight. And even if you win, a lot of ways for it to not look that great. I mean, it's not a bad idea to go on there, and especially he's like, hey, Jordan Johnson, he was talking shit online. I want to fight that guy. Like, okay, I didn't have really a reason to care too much about either one of you, but maybe you can give us one.
What about this? What if he had gone out there and called out the legend Shogun Rua? Would we feel more positive about that, or would we be like, no, Dominic Reyes, low-hanging fruit?
Yes. Yeah. Come on. I would be like mildly offended for you to go out there and call out Shogun, because everybody knows what you're trying to do there. I mean, I respect it more to call out another guy who it feels like is around the same level, like another young guy, and like, hey, let's start ourselves some new beefs. Let's be the Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz of the coming age, rather than just trying to pick on an actual Chuck Liddell or Tito Ortiz as they got one foot in the retirement home.
So maybe Jordan Johnson wasn't that bad.
Maybe not.
I feel like we're making a lot of rules now for guys to call people out after their fights.
Are we writing this down?
Well, first, you want it to be somebody we know.
Ideally.
You want to be able to pronounce it.
Okay.
So Godzimirad Antigulov is out.
Okay.
Sitting there ranked number 13. So I'm just saying, if you're Dominic Reyes and you look around the division looking for people that you might want to call out, Jordan Johnson, Jean Vellante, Tyson Pedro, Patrick Cummins, Misha Sirkunov, Corey Anderson, Ovince St. Preux. I just read out the bottom half of the light heavyweight rankings.
Okay.
Other than that, calling out the legend, Shogun Rua, for one last dance.
Don't do it.
Next question this week comes to us from David Hassan. He writes, I'm about to do the thing and I just can't help myself. Is Tatiana Suarez a future champ? 6-0 with 4 finishes, 9-0 with 6 finishes if you count her Ultimate Fighter run. She has the highest level wrestling credentials. She has only been training MMA for 4 years. As long as she doesn't get trapped into thinking she can strike with the top of the food chain strikers, I don't see her losing. She's Mexican. She's a cancer survivor. She has a story worth telling if the UFC wants to get off their ass. She seems to have a bit of the overtraining disease that is prevalent in MMA. If she figures this out, I don't see who she can't match. Discourse.
Yeah, I thought that was an impressive fight from her, and again, another one where you look at somebody and you think, all right, here's somebody we might end up caring about as the years progress. She has that win on The Ultimate Fighter. I did not watch any of that. So it feels like you're still doing a thing where you're trying to introduce these people, even though you had a reality show to introduce them. But now you go out there and just kind of school Alexa Grasso as soon as you get her to the mat. Another fighter who's undefeated, another fighter with a 3-fight win streak going on in the UFC. And I find myself asking the same question. You're getting them exposure, you're pinpointing new people, but is anybody finding out about them on fight cards like this?
Well, here's what I want to know, Ben. What are we doing with Alexa Grasso here? Because you'll remember when Alexa Grasso came over from Invicta, and I believe she also had a big run in Invicta. She came in with a lot of hype. She was 8-0, beats Heather Jo Clark in her UFC debut, loses to Felice Herrig, you'll remember, then came back and beat Randa Marcos, although in a fight where Alexa Grasso missed weight. It wasn't all that long ago that we were talking about Alexa Grasso as a pretty big time prospect in this division. And yet, as they say on the broadcast here against Tatiana Suarez, Suarez was the biggest favorite on the main card at minus 700.
Well, and still,
so from a matchmaking standpoint, what are we doing?
It still seemed like heading into this fight, if you were following, the buzz on social media and stuff, more people were excited about Alexa Grasso. People were excited to see Alexa Grasso. I mean, maybe the idea there was if you've decided, maybe Alexa Grasso is not going to be the thing, but she still has some popularity, maybe you want to get it to transfer over to Tatiana Suarez. Maybe the problem is you realize Tatiana Suarez, one tough, is undefeated and still nobody cares. Right. So you put her up against Alexa Grasso and now you come out of this event and people are going, oh yeah, Tatiana Suarez.
But again, maybe that's true. Maybe if we are UFC matchmakers, maybe we have, for whatever reason, bailed off the Alexa Grasso train in record time, I would say. I have not even got to break this out yet. Karen Alexa Grasso Montes.
Okay, that's not bad.
So let's say we've done that. For UFC matchmakers, we've bailed off the Alexa Grasso train. We've decided to give the shine to Tatiana Suarez. Again, we return to your central point. Why do it at UFC Fight Night 129 from Santiago, Chile? Maybe going to be one of the lowest rated cards of the year.
Right. Well, I guess what they're thinking is, got to do it somewhere. You want to put some fights on this, on a fight card like this. You don't have a whole bunch of Chilean fighters that you can offer up to the fans in Santiago, Chile. And so the approach seemed to be, all right, let's give them anyone we can find south of the U.S. border, and we'll call it good. And so maybe, you felt like, all right, we have some actual prospects in some of these divisions. We don't know what to do with them. They're not pay-per-view quality, but they are main card quality for a fight card like this. And maybe you're hoping that'll help, the aggregate will help get people's attention. I don't know if that worked necessarily, because it seemed like a lot of people looked at this fight card and saw, okay, Demian Maia, Kamaru Usman is the only fight I care about. I can DVR that shit rather than waiting up until 1 a.m. on the East Coast to actually see it. So I don't know if people are going to necessarily catch on to this stuff yet. If you're like a casual fan, does it seem like, she's going to show up on the prelims of a pay-per-view or on a main card or something? And does it seem like Tatiana Suarez just stepped out of the head of Zeus? Like you have no idea where she came from or what she's been doing?
It's going to feel like that. And to me, it feels like we couldn't wait to light a stick of dynamite under Alexa Grasso. Like, as the UFC, like, we couldn't wait to blow that up for some reason. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I have no idea. Next question this week comes to us from Isaac Spooner. He writes, how about your boy Nicky Thrills knocking out Fabio Maldonado over the weekend? Started with a groin shot off the very first low kick, which saw Fabs lying on the canvas for the full 5, and ended with a right hook KO from Krylov to earn him the Fight Nights Global Light Heavyweight Championship. Totally worth the $8 internet pay-per-view stream. Other highlights include the ring announcer's crocodile skin highlighted suit and the English language commentary comparing Maldonado to both Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes.
I gotta know, how do you compare Fabio Maldonado to Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes?
Well, he's the hillbilly heartthrob, right? Isn't that Fabio Maldonado?
Is it?
I thought he was.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong about that. But
I did see the nut shot, though, that put him down. And when he says laying on the canvas for the full 5, he really means it. Like, the clip I saw, it looks like Fabio Maldonado has been shot by a sniper in the crowd. And that is immediately, right off the bat, groin shot. But then, Nicky Thrills gets himself lands that clean hook on the break and knocks him out cold. Is this starting to look like this was a genius decision by Nikita Krylov to go over there? And, instead of being another faceless Russian dude in the UFC who they didn't care about too much, now you're a capital G guy over in Fight Nights Global.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to phrase it the other way about the UFC letting these guys go. Kyoji Horiguchi, Nikita Krylov going over there to Fight Nights Global. Now he's won 4 fights in a row, including the first round KO of the big homie, Emmanuel Newton, via knee, 43 seconds in.
Man, universe really let him down.
That's tough. And then you got Fabio Maldonado now, punch, knockout, second round. So Nikita Krylov, yeah, man, he seems like maybe one that got away from the UFC, and maybe you can't really fault him all that much for realizing what we have talked about on the podcast before, that there seems to be a burgeoning MMA scene over there in Russia, and maybe he realized he could be the guy and go over there and make a bunch of money.
Okay, but
more power to him.
Does the UFC look at that as a missed opportunity, or does the UFC be like, well, hey, they can do more with him? Like, he would not, same thing with Horiguchi. Like, there's just only so much we could do with that guy, but a promotion, where he's more of a local draw could do a whole lot more with him. Or if you're the UFC, are you feeling like, man, it would have been nice to have Nicky Thrills when we go to Moscow?
Maybe 26 years old, 2 years less than Dominic Reyes we were just talking about. It seems like a guy who jumps back and forth between light heavyweight and heavyweight might be a guy you'd want to have, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know. Next question this week comes to us from Rusty Poor. He writes, guys, I did something this week and I haven't done in almost 10 years. I purposefully did not watch a UFC event. I actually lived, grilled out with my family, caught up on bad sitcoms with my wife. Does this mean my shit-eating wild man status is in jeopardy? On one hand, I feel like I betrayed a loved one by not spending time with them, parenthetically the UFC. On the other hand, I feel that this further goes to show the weakness of UFC TV cards and how it is making skipping as an option a no-brainer. What are your thoughts?
I can't say I would have watched this one live if I did not have to do it for a work obligation.
Yeah.
I would have DVR'd this one, maybe tried to avoid spoilers at least for the main event, and then I would have actively sought out spoilers to see which of the fights were worth watching and going through afterwards, which, maybe is not necessarily a killer for the UFC if I'm still finding out about the people who matter, because, I would have heard like, okay, Dominic Reyes goes out there and finishes somebody. Tatiana Suarez looked good. I probably would have checked out those fights and just not had to sit through all the endless commercials in order to do it. So maybe that's not so bad. But there is a danger in just getting people into the habit of thinking like, well, there's another UFC event, but I can skip it. Because that is how you lose fans gradually.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this in relation to the ESPN Plus deal that we talked about a little bit last week. I can't remember exactly the detail that we got into it about the ESPN Plus deal, but then we were talking off air because kind of making the point that the UFC is going to get paid per fight card by ESPN for this streaming service. Essentially what they get paid now for a UFC pay-per-view that does what, like 300,000 buys essentially, which is not every one at this point. And that makes you wonder exactly what the focus of UFC matchmaking and, the strength of cards is going to be moving forward in 2019, because on one hand, maybe it'll be good for fans, because if ESPN is paying this kind of money, maybe you will get like a Fight Night 129 quality broadcast on ESPN Plus, but maybe it would have, Amanda Nunes title defense as the main event in theory. But there's another aspect to it that I can't remember if we talked about last week or not, Ben, that perhaps the idea that the UFC just got paid all this money to put its content on a streaming service from ESPN might change the direction, not only of star building for the UFC, but of like the construction of cards and matchmaking in a way that, hardcore fans and casual fans alike may not find all that, palatable.
Right. Well, and another thing I think you have to consider, Danny Downs and I talked a little bit about this in our column this week, is, if the plan, and as it's laid out right now that we've heard, the plan is for beginning in 2019, you got 15 events on ESPN Plus, 15 events on whoever ends up being the broadcast TV partner, and then 12 pay-per-views. So 42 events, and of that 42, you're looking at 27 of them that are behind one paywall or another. Whether it's the $5 a month ESPN Plus subscription or the $65 for the pay-per-views. But that is a noted increase, because that's almost 2/3 of UFC events where you got to pay something in order to watch at least the main card portion of it. Whereas if you looked at, 2017, it was around 40% between like Fight Pass events and pay-per-views, where there was like a paywall involved in order to get there. And if you don't have something that makes it seem like, well, I got to watch this, you can't do it's okay, I care about one or two fights, I'll DVR it and I'll go back. That gets tougher to do when you're charging money for the shit. It makes me have a different calculation in my mind if I'm a fan thinking about, do I want to grill on the deck and spend some time with my actual loved ones on a Saturday night for a change, or do I want to be right there in my seat for the UFC as usual? If you're asking me to pay a subscription fee and the fight cards are still, Santiago Chile quality, then I'm asking myself some hard questions.
Right. And the thing that I was trying to get at, and the thing it makes me wonder, is does it fundamentally change the way the UFC thinks about its product, in that it's getting all this money now for these streaming service cards? Because previous to this, almost all of the conversation about the UFC business model has, centered around big stars like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey,
Right.
Brock Lesnar, and the importance of cultivating those figures that can kind of carry the load on pay-per-view. So that's sort of like the pay-per-view model. And then, previous to the Fox deal, it kind of felt like the UFC just tried to stack all of its like Spike TV cards with people that you knew, but also with awesome fights. Some of that obviously has changed, as we have moved into the Fox deal, and the number of events per year went up and up and all that stuff. My question is, do we reach a point where the UFC is less interested with either cultivating stars or putting on awesome fight cards as it is merely producing a shitload of content that it can sell to these various bidders that then they can feature on their streaming services and wherever else?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to get moved in that direction if you're the UFC, don't you? Because now you'll be spreading out your content across 3 different platforms: pay-per-view, broadcast, streaming. It has to change the way you focus on it. But the problem is, like, you're still going to want to sell those pay-per-views. If you're doing 12 pay-per-views a year, you're still going to want to at least have a couple home runs in there. You need to have some big stars in there. I guess, though, it becomes, you get insulated a little bit from the nature of the pay-per-view business, where you can line up a great pay-per-view and maybe it just doesn't perform. Maybe there's an injury or two that knocks things out. Deals like this, where you're getting paid regardless, that does help you out a little bit, so you don't have to be like quite such a victim to that feast or famine mentality that can go on in pay-per-view. What I wonder, though, is how much, say, ESPN and whoever ends up being the broadcast partner gets over some of these fight cards. Because if you're ESPN Plus and you're paying $150 million a year to stream UFC events, you're not going to be content with just a bunch of, former tough holdovers hanging around in the UFC who nobody cares about.
Last question this week comes to us from Brandon Boyd. He writes, Ariel Helwani and Chael Sonnen are teaming up and hosting a podcast on ESPN Plus Add to that the new deal with the UFC, and you have what looks to me more than just the UFC using the UFC as a loss leader, as Ben proclaimed last week. Is ESPN looking to do more with the UFC, or is this a play to get in the good graces of Endeavor? Discuss, por favor.
Well, first of all, to correct Brandon Boyd on a fact, what I was saying is that Dave Meltzer had used the term loss leader as, a potential loss leader as one way of thinking about how ESPN might be looking at the UFC. But that didn't mean that they didn't care about the UFC, just that they felt like even if they might be overpaying for it, it would get people in the door of this streaming service because the UFC has a really hardcore audience that will follow it all over the place. But to me, them hiring Ariel Helwani and then having him host a podcast with Chael Sonnen, I guess it's not that surprising. It's just that historically, whenever ESPN sees an opportunity to make money off of a sport, then it gets a lot more interested in having coverage and content around that sport. And this is no different.
It's interesting. Oh, it's big news right here in the mixed martial arts media landscape to have Ariel Helwani, the biggest, highest profile reporter in the game, cross over from his longtime home at Vox and MMAfighting.com. It will mean the end of the MMA Fortnight as we know it, although I think
he'll just do the MMA Fortnight basically for ESPN.
Right. It sounds like Ariel's going to have a number of duties over there, at least from his own tweet. He'll have essentially the new version of the MMA Fortnight. He'll have the podcast with Chael Sonnen, and then I think they're going to have like a TV show, like or a video show, I guess it would be, on ESPN Plus, which I don't know exactly how to think of it. It will be Ariel and Chael hosting it, but I guess it will be sort of like the new version of UFC Tonight or whatever. I can't remember ESPN used to have a show, an MMA show that I'm blanking on the name of it right now, which is embarrassing since I worked there.
MMA Live?
MMA Live, there you go. So it's going to be like the new version of MMA Live. So that's, it makes it look like ESPN is getting back in the MMA business, or at least getting into the UFC business, in a way that could be heartening, for people who wondered what the future was and what the new broadcast deals were going to affect in terms of the lay of the land. As a guy who got essentially laid off by ESPN circa 2010, and I think also as a guy who personally advocated that we should try to hire Ariel Helwani when the question was raised, like, what do we need to do to beef up our MMA coverage? And I was like, I don't know, hire Ariel Helwani. So it's interesting to me to see.
They listen to you. Good work.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that it was that memo.
They were like, remember what Chad Dundas said?
8 years later. It's interesting to see the pendulum sort of swing back the other way now, as it seems that ESPN is at least in a small way getting back in the MMA business. And they just kicked
Would you
over
expect that, though?
Wags also.
That's right. Jeff Wagenheim.
Going to be a full-time MMA reporter over there also.
Wouldn't you expect that, though, once you get in your ESPN, if you're deciding like, okay, we're going to be airing UFC events, we want it to do well, we're going to make money if it does well, therefore we should be treating it like a real sport and covering it that way, and it helps them. So, that's always what ESPN does.
Sure. I would have thought they would have done that a while ago, and I guess they just needed to literally get in the business to get in the business. Anyway, that's going to do it for listener mail this week. If you have a question, a comment, a concern that you would like to air to the podcast in future weeks, you know how to do it. You go to the website, comainevent.com, and click the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen that says email the podcast. That'll get you in touch with us. While you're there, you can sign up for the Breakfast of Champions newsletter. That comes out every Friday morning to catch you up on the news and notes that we miss on all the days that we're not recording the podcast. Stuff always happens. News always breaks. The newsletter itself is short. It's informative. We would love to tell you it's funny. And if you don't like it, it's really easy to unsubscribe. As for right now, though, we are going to go ahead and get started with round number 1.